Hello everyone and welcome to the Mobycon Academy in our Women's Month of March. My name is Angela van der Kloof and I work at Mobycon as a strategic advisor for the international market. And today I'm excited to interview Jill Warren. Very welcome, Jill. She's the CEO of the European Cyclists Federation, and we're going to talk a bit about personal aspects as well as work-related items. Jill, I was just thinking, for how long is Jill the CEO of the European Cyclists Federation? So please remind everyone of that. And so welcome in our studio, and you are dialing in from Brussels. Thank you for that. And I'm excited to talk with you about your background and your journey in cycling and advocacy world. Could you kick off a little bit to talk about that?
Sure. Okay. Thanks very much, Angela. So, a bit about my background. I'm American, as you can probably hear from my accent, from the Chicago area where I grew up. About 30 years ago, I went to Germany to do part of my studies and met a Dutchman there, of all people, and pretty much stayed in Europe after that. So over the past 30 years, I've lived and worked in Germany, the UK, and Belgium, and Brussels, where I'm now based. My journey in cycling. So I've always liked everyday cycling in terms of cycling being a great way to get from point A to point B. But what I really love to do is long distance cycling. So long distance bike rides on the weekends. Maybe you've heard about these middle-aged men in Lycra. I'm a middle-aged woman in Lycra going around on my bike. I've gone on cycling holidays, gastronomic biking tours in Italy. I once cycled along the Danube River from the source in Donaueschingen to Vienna in about 9 days. That was a strenuous trip, but very fun. And I don't go on holiday unless I can take my bicycle with me to go exploring. My journey in advocacy is slightly different than the journey in cycling. So for 20 years before joining ECF last year, so I joined ECF in February last year. So I've been here just over a year, and all but 6 weeks of it has more or less been in lockdown. So you can imagine I haven't been able to get out and about as much as I would like to have in this role. But so my journey in advocacy, for the 20 years before coming here, I worked in large international law firms, all of which offered their clients advocacy advice, so EU lobbying, basically, among other services. So I was very familiar with how companies will engage law firms to assist them in their lobbying activities. And that really showed me that companies see real value in advocacy. They see value in trying to influence the processes to make sure that the regulation and that the environment for the business that they do is favorable to what they want to achieve. And it's no different from civil society, I think, in terms of what we want to achieve for cycling. When the CEO role here at ECF came free and I saw that, I thought, what a perfect combination of a world I'm already familiar with and something I love to do. So that's how I got here, the perfect opportunity to combine cycling and advocacy.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that a lot of members of cycling unions throughout the EU, are excited to hear a little bit more also about, who you are and how this came about. I love also how enthusiastic you share your experience, about, for example, the gastronomic bike tours. This is immediately, ringing a bell also in my head, and like, oh, how much I wished we could do that again. So hopefully,
Yeah, me too.
hopefully this summer will offer some opportunities. We don't have to go far, right? We're living in, well, living in Belgium with a good gastronomic culture. You don't have to go far to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so these, as I understand it from what you told me previously, this lobby work that you did, this advocacy or lobby work that you did was in the also in the mobility sector, but not in cycling. So in that corner of the mobility field, so outside of the cycling field, can you tell us something about the status of women in that part of the mobility sector, and whether that is any different from what you see in the cycling sector?
Mm-hmm. Okay, just about my previous experience with mobility as well. Before being in law firms for 20 years, I was in the automotive sector. So that would have been my first experience
Yeah, okay.
in let's say the wider mobility sector, if you like. So I spent a lot of the 1990s in the automotive industry. And certainly at that time, there were hardly any women. I think I was working in a department with 18 men. I went to a sales and marketing conference with 120 men and 5 women. And of course, all of the activities and everything were geared towards things that guys like to do. I think we went go-karting, and that was always the team building activity. It was always those kind of things. I really liked working in that field, and it's just the way it was. You didn't think about it very much because that was just how things were. Um, I'm sure that today in the cycling sector, there are more women than there were in the automotive sector in the 1990s, and certainly both sectors have moved on between then and now. But women are still clearly in the minority. We know that in the wider transport sector in the EU, if you like, it's about 22% women. So that is quite a bit less than in some other sectors. So you can imagine, that does mean that first of all, there's fewer of us. What is the status of women? I think you don't see all that many women in top management roles, in board roles. So there's certainly quite a bit of work to do. Yeah.
And I think so. So when I think about women in the cycling sector, and we're both involved in this initiative of women in cycling that some of our people in the audience are hopefully familiar with. I think in the cycling sector there are also quite a few small businesses and independent people working, right? So it is not the same as, say, public transport sector, where there are the huge companies, train company or bus company. So it will be exciting, I guess, to figure out more about the role that women play in this sector and how they can, what their needs are in their professional careers, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's never been a better time to be a woman in any sector. I really believe that. But I think also in the mobility sector, there is much more focus on what are the needs of women, how can we encourage them, enable them, empower them more. And it's really nice to see that a lot of men are on board with this as well, because I think these things don't truly work and unless the men believe that it's of advantage to them, that they do work. So I think the future is bright.
Yeah, good. And so in your current position as a CEO of the Cyclist Federation, what do you hope to achieve in the coming years? Can you take us along on that journey?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I see my number one mission or goal is to really help achieve our very, very ambitious strategy. And the ambitious strategy that we signed off last year with our members is, and developed together with the members, is to have this overall overarching goal of increasing cycling levels across the whole of Europe by 50% compared to 2019 levels by 2030. That's huge. That means more cycling across Europe. It means better cycling so that more people will want to do it. It's safer cycling. It's much more funding for cycling infrastructure. That translates, for example, into, we've set targets of 6 billion euros from EU structural funds to be put into cycling infrastructure projects over the next 6 years, for example. It's also trying to get about 10 billion from the recovery funds that the EU has made available now for cycling related measures. It's 3 billion in cycle tourism type funding. It takes so much lobbying and so much advocacy to be able to unlock that kind of funding and to change budgets, policies, and attitudes in order to enable so much more cycling. And I should also say that most of its growth is going to have to come from the countries where cycling levels presently are much lower than the countries like the Netherlands or Denmark, where we already have very, very good levels of cycling. So there's a lot of work to do where we're not as far yet.
Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to like concrete, activities or actions, changes, what do you think, from the ECF perspective, is the most important in these countries where the levels are low? What are you focusing on?
Mm-hmm. I think the number one most important thing is making sure that there is safe and comfortable infrastructure for people to cycle on. I think that's, if there's one thing you can do to really enable more cycling, it's to have the proper and safe infrastructure for it so that people will be inclined to do it. Now, of course, there's many other things you can do. You need to make sure that people have access to bicycles. You need to, you need to do a lot of other things. But if I had to pick one thing, it's really, let's focus on that safe and comfortable cycling infrastructure.
Yeah, and can you give an example of what ECF then does with maybe their members in such countries to help them, play a role in that process?
Yeah, so a lot of different things. We operate on the principle of subsidiarity. So we are the umbrella federation for around 70 member and associate member organizations located all through Europe. So we work on behalf of and together with our members. So in some cases, in these countries that have the lower cycling levels, very often they also have member organizations that will be smaller, less well developed or funded. So we can also help them in their own development by, helping them, what is effective lobbying, what is effective activism and organizing, and all of these different things that really help to advocate at the national, at the regional, at the local level for better cycling measures and for the kinds of investments that make a difference. So it's really, and there's an educational aspect of it. We, through our own funding, try to also help these organizations to professionalize, to go from, let's say, in some cases, an all-volunteer organization to where they could have a couple of paid positions so that there is that focus on what they would need to do to promote cycling as a sustainable and healthy means of transport and leisure in their areas. And it's a horses for courses type thing, because different members need different things from us. But those would be a couple of examples of the type of things we would do.
Yeah.
One other example that I think is quite important. I mentioned before that 6 billion in EU structural funds. We produce, for example, 27 country-specific guides to unlocking EU funding. So using the feedback the Commission has given the particular countries about what they need to do, along with where in the structural funds can you find opportunities for cycling investment projects? How do you, what are some good practice examples? How do you apply for these funds and successfully get access to the kind of funding that you can do cycling infrastructure projects with?
And is that so? So I imagine that is then also helping the local or regional or national cycling organizations to be like good partners with the authorities and give them ideas and help them to unlock these financial
Absolutely, and we'll hold
resources.
webinars and things where the municipal authorities can join. So we'll speak directly to them
Yeah.
where that makes a difference and where that's welcomed. And the bridge between us and them, of course, are our member organizations, and we'll do whatever it takes and what's helpful to facilitate that.
Yeah, okay. That's a good, that's insightful. And so to go a bit back to you as a person, Jill, can you give us some ideas of what types of things or who has inspired you, in your career or in your life? Is there something you want to share about that?
Yeah, there's so many ways to answer that question, because I think if you've had a longer career, you've met a lot of really interesting people and seen a lot of inspiring things and people along the way. I think leaders who challenge the status quo really inspire me. So the ones who are willing to really stand up for what they believe in, to make things better for others, to effect real change, that to me is very inspiring. If I think of a leader right now in power who really inspires me that way, I would say Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, who has done so much for cycling in such a relatively short period of time. When you compare how long such changes have taken in other big cities, it's just absolutely amazing. And so I think challenging the status quo, having the political will and courage to stick to the changes that you want to make is incredibly inspiring, I think.
Yeah, yeah, nice. And yeah, and then if you think about yourself, is there a certain highlight in your career up to now that you would like to share with the audience?
Mhm. One highlight was certainly being successful in landing this job, because for me it was just absolutely perfect in terms of something I'm very, very passionate about personally. That was a good match for my skill set. So that was an absolute highlight. And it's my first CEO role as well. So it brings with it other challenges that I always wanted to take on in that sense. Um, More generally, I think career highlights really come from being part of collective successes where it might be a big product launch or winning an award, or doing something where everyone kind of rolled up their sleeves, everyone was invested in it, and you made it happen and it went well. And that's always just really satisfying career moments. I think if I had to pick one that's happened since I've joined ECF last autumn, we were lucky to be able to convince the EU Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans to speak at an event of ours. And he had been very favorable towards cycling, which is fantastic because sometimes it can be quite difficult to get the powers that be to be interested in what we're trying to promote. And here we found a champion in Frans Timmermans. And so he agreed to speak at an event of ours where we gathered 6 or 7 mayors from EU cities, plus the transport minister in Ireland, to have a roundtable debate about what is it do the cities and the regions and the countries need from the EU to be able to have more and better cycling in their countries and realize all the benefits that come from that. And just having that fantastic panel and just we'd never had anyone that high up at the commission just be such a clear champion for cycling before, and to have well over 1,000 people sign up for the event and have it go really well was a huge highlight for the team here.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, nice. I'm glad that I was able to join that webinar actually, and I found it also very vibrant, and it's really nice if you then through Twitter see that there is so, more people are watching it and enjoy what is happening there. And then on the other side, when you have a bad day, I assume that you, like everyone else, sometimes have a bad day. What do you do then?
Yeah. Oh, that's a very good question. We all have bad days, so I'm no exception to that. There can be frustration, I think, in every job. Um, I think I try to find a way to take a deep breath, just to try to get a bit of perspective about whatever it is that seems all consuming in the moment. I think keeping your cool, taking a deep breath, finding that perspective, and then maybe that evening having a nice long hot bath or doing something to distract yourself to try to get your balance back there and not have it be too all-consuming or blown out of proportion in a way that, at the end of the day, we're all human. Most of the things we have a bad day about are not life-threatening things like that. You just have to see it in the perspective that it really merits.
Yeah, okay. So not even a bike ride is involved here then.
Well, sometimes, well, it's usually the bike ride on the way home from work.
Yeah,
So
right.
got that out of the way. Then it's the bath and and everything else.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so then we're jumping to something completely different. When it comes to data and knowledge, there is this popular book, Invisible Women. I'm sure some people in the audience are aware of the book or maybe read it or saw talks by Caroline Criado Perez, the author. Invisible Women, Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. And in that book, there are several aspects discussed that are related to public space and also to transport. So here I would like to share a short video with the author talking about public transport. Marijn.
Not so lucky there either. It turns out in London, a fifth of women in fact, have been sexually assaulted on buses and tubes, and 90% of them didn't report it. Also, there's the problem that public transport isn't really designed in a way that accounts for women's care work, and that's partly because of how we collect data. So we collect data on paid employment and educational purposes as 2 blocks. So they come out as huge amounts of travel that is done, and those are called compulsory mobility. But the kind of trips that women have to do in addition to their paid work, taking the kids to school, taking an elderly relative to work, picking up the groceries, all the things that actually have to get done for life to carry on, are not seen as compulsory mobility, they're seen as leisure, and they are divided into lots of different little blocks. So it looks like there's not really that much of it going on, but actually
I can't hear you.
Phase. But she doesn't talk about cycling in her book. So suppose we could, ask Caroline to research something around gender bias in cycling or in the cycling sector. What could be topics that she looks into that could contribute to the discussion about creating less gender bias in data collection or knowledge collection?
Mm-hmm. I thought about this, and I almost inevitably, of course, related this back to kind of personal experience and things. I think, unlike cars, let's say, and I know that in her book she talks quite a lot about one of the gender bias issues in the automotive sector is that the cars are crash tested with crash test dummies that are the size of the average man, which means that when a woman is in a crash, then she's much more likely to be seriously injured because of the way that things are designed as a result of how they test things. I think unlike cars, bicycles come in many more shapes and sizes, which is a good thing. There's women's bicycles, there's men's bicycles. If I'm totally honest, I would admit that as a quite short woman, two of my bicycles are probably more teenager-sized bicycles. So that part of it, I think, is not bad. But I do think that there's some safety aspects associated with cycling that maybe need more attention, that can differ between men and women. And one thing I would highlight is the safe carriage of children on bicycles. I think, both men and women, might have a seat mounted on the bike and carry a child around. But I do ask myself, what assumptions are made in the research and testing of these kinds of accessories? Women have, different bodies, different average heights, different areas of muscular strength. And so when you're carrying something like this on your bike, your most precious thing, really, how might that affect how the thing is designed? What the safety is when you've got one of those things on your bike, and I might have a very different bike than my husband or somebody else. I wonder about those things. So how stable, how sturdy in these kinds of situations where safety is really paramount in all sorts of ways. I also think about that in terms of the marketing and sales of these things. Am I being advised correctly when I go into the bike shop and say, I want to have one of those mounted on my bicycle? Am I being advised correctly? Am I getting the right one for my particular situation? Query, I don't know. Maybe there's already been a lot of stuff done there and I'm underestimating things, but certainly I don't feel like I always get that kind of advice in those situations. And then something slightly different in terms of this whole kind of gender aspect. You can build great cycling infrastructure, but how safe am I going to feel as a woman using it? Is it well lit? Will I feel as safe there at any time of the day than a man would? Now, these are wider societal things, I realize, but I also think in the design of cycling infrastructure, we can think about those things and take them into account and recognize very clearly that there are differences in perceived safety and actual safety. And are we researching these and taking them into account enough in our decision making and investments in cycling?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for those ideas and thoughts. And I think it is. I have never come across really, a report talking about child seats and what would fit better on certain bicycles or not. I have no idea. Also, I neither have a good idea of how they're being tested. But having this knowledge about how these things are tested with cars, then we may, it is not strange to think that there maybe is a biased way of looking at those aspects. So that's a great idea, and who knows, we can bring that forward somehow at some point, or somebody can take that idea and run with it. And so my last question to you for tonight or today, Jill, is suppose that the European Union, got so excited about cycling that they would form a ministry, a European ministry for cycling. What do you think? According to you, what should that look like?
Mm-hmm. Ooh, wouldn't that be wonderful if they did that? I think that such an agency, or whatever you want to call it, whatever form it would take, would not only support, but deliberately prioritize cycling, and active mobility generally, cycling and walking in particular, over other modes of transport. Because of all the benefits, of all of the really clear benefits that cycling brings. So we all know that these include, climate benefits, health benefits, people's well-being, the connectivity between cities and things, and being able to go where you want to go by bicycle, to make our cities more livable, to may have more vibrant local economies, if you like. I just think there are just so many benefits that taking those into account and prioritizing cycling over other modes of transport should be the mission of a ministry like that, should it exist. And there's one other thing I'd really like from a ministry like that. I also think it should provide massive support to cycle tourism, not only because I love to go on cycling tours, but that's also a good reason, but because there's just no better way to spend a nice holiday or a nice afternoon than by discovering something on a bike, and with all the potential there is for truly sustainable tourism. And it's such a nice family activity. It ticks so many boxes in terms of how we could transform the tourism environment that we currently operate in, with the over tourism and the carbon emissions of typical holidays and things. That would be an important mission of such a ministry too.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, who knows, Jill? Who knows? And so I hear from my colleague Marijn that there is one question from the audience. And so it is here from Michelle. Could Jill talk about any surprises during her year at ECF?
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Gosh, certainly there have been some surprises. Well, maybe there's a few I could mention. The biggest surprise, of course, was COVID, that nobody saw that coming in terms of how it would shut down the way we work and how we do what we do. So it's been a surprise in a bunch of ways. First of all, how do we operate? How do we continue doing business as usual? Well, you don't. You have to find a new way to do it. Then it caused some funding issues for us that made things more challenging. On the other hand, the pandemic that came along proved to be a huge opportunity for cycling and a huge boost for cycling. And that was a fantastic surprise in terms of opening up new avenues for us to advocate and to seize the opportunity to promote cycling in ways that maybe weren't quite there in the same way before.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, and thank you, Michelle, for asking that question. So yes, with that, I would like to wrap up this interview and webinar. Thank you so much, Jill, for your time and your enthusiasm and sharing your personal and work story with us. It is much appreciated. And
thank you, Angela.
Yeah, and also thank you to our audience, who was watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, Marijn, for all the technical assistance here in the studio. I would like to say to the audience, follow us on Twitter, promote our Mobycon Academy amongst people that you think may be interested in a wide range of topics that we present to the audience. And actually, I would like to finish this webinar with one of my favorite feel-good cycling video clips by a band that's called Anthony's Push. And the song is King of the World. See you next time.
No I'm afraid